we're talking about methylation. So I'm going to try to start this little series on it, and I'm probably going to write a little article about it just because, you know, in my practice, we talk about it so much, and I think there's so much biochemistry to it that it's lots of layers of understanding with methylation. You've got, say, folate, right, or folic acid. Folic acid's kind of more of a synthetic version of folate, and folate's a B vitamin, right? And it's, I guess folic acid's probably most known for making sure it's in a prenatal, or women are supposed to definitely take folic acid so you don't have a kid with spina bifida, right? We're always telling women, definitely pump yourself full of folic acid because you need to make sure you don't have those depletions if you're pregnant or if you get pregnant. But so we knew that, right? Folic acid was a thing. And then we started learning that methylfolate is a bigger thing. So what does methylfolate mean? Well, in chemistry, a methyl group is a carbon with 3 hydrogens on it. So its designation is CH3. And you know what's interesting in biochemistry, I remember learning this in like cell biology class when you're studying that and genetics and DNA and all that kind of stuff. Methylation was there to kind of create even like DNA replication, but then also gene regulation. So all your epigenetics, the regulation and the replication and the turning on and off of genes is kind of done through these little methyl switches. You know, so methylation was kind of like a big thing of study, right? So you would study how DNA was methylated, and it was always just, you know, parts of the biochemistry that you were learning about how the genes are actually turning on and turning off and all that kind of thing. So that's the first time I had really studied methylation, was in those classes. But here we're talking about, oh, we're putting a methyl group on folate. So what's that doing? It's making methylfolate. And guess what happened? Like the studies where you would give this methylfolate to people who had strong anxiety, and the anxiety would really, 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 really get better. Like people would report, man, that was a better anxiolytic than my actual anxiolytic, you know. So the feedback for being calmer was really strongly observed with methylfolate. Well, why does somebody need methylfolate? Well, studying genetics helped us understand that. There's a lot of gene mutations for not being able to activate that folate. So there's 2 particular genes. Now they've renamed these. I'm getting to the point where I'm aging. And so things in chemistry and science get renamed, but I'm using the old designation. I think I still call it the Krebs cycle. So when you've got, say, anxiety. Well, okay, back to the genetics. So they were A1298C and C677T. Those were the 2 main SNPs that were present, or mutations that were present that meant that you don't put a methyl group on folate. When you don't do that, lots of things don't go right, you know. So, and it's more than just anxiety. We're going to talk a lot about all the aspects to that. So methylfolate, what it can do is it's now a methyl donor. And so the methyl donor is like car keys to run enzymes, you know, and these enzymes are actually super important for regulating adrenaline, epinephrine and norepinephrine. And guess what? If you have too much of that hanging out for too long, are you going to feel anxious? Are you going to feel nervous? Yep. Are you even going to have, like, maybe for everybody who's got that kind of anxiety disorder, if they qualify for that, that's probably part of their problem, you know. You know, you've got epinephrine and norepinephrine. They come from dopamine. Dopamine comes from tyrosine, right? So an amino acid, you know, gives rise to dopamine, which is kind of a modulatory neurotransmitter. It's sometimes inhibitory, sometimes excitatory. That means sometimes it slows down and helps you feel better and calmer, and sometimes speeds you up and helps you feel awake and alert and anxious and stuff like that. So dopamine gives rise to norepinephrine, and that gives rise to epinephrine. These guys use an enzyme pathway called COMT, catecholamine, which is the family name, you know, of epinephrine and norepinephrine especially, catecholamine, O, which is just your chemical designation. Oh, I have to remember what that means. It's a, I'll look that up. I'll go remember what the little O means. And then methyl transferase, MT. So in biochemistry, when you see these MT on the end of these enzymes, that tells you something. It tells you it needs a methyl donor. So it's not just COMT, and that helps with adrenaline, right? But it is HNMT in the histamine family, PEMT in the choline family, brain function world, and fatty liver issues. So it's interesting because there's others. I have to think of them. But those are like 3 good examples of how then methylation is used. Now, COMT, I was kind of reviewing that. The methylation donor does come a lot from SAMe, which is in that methionine cycle. I think we should show you a picture. Let's see about that. Okay, so here, this is kind of what we're talking about. This is that methylation map picture. So here's the methionine cycle. And here's what I mean by SAMe. So SAMe was a methylation donor for who? COMT. And so that was to activate COMT. The other cofactor here is going to be magnesium. But we're still trying to piece together kind of like how methylation probably adds to this. Methylation adds to here because here's our actual methylfolate pathway. So here's the key. We've got these, here's the folate cycle. That's this. So here's our methylfolate cycle. So these, I should go this way. So these are basically like the ways that that methylation is sort of like, I want to say handed off over and over again so that you can build up and balance cycles here. So then you've got your SAMe running, and so that you can actually run the enzyme here along with magnesium to take down your epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine, right? So here, this is what's happening here. You want to know something though? COMT is also where estrogen goes. So estrogen, there's a hydroxyestrogen. And when women are estrogen dominant or men have too much estrogen later in life or earlier in life, whenever that happens for them, the estrogen, hydroxyestrogen, has to be metabolized out, COMT as well, and it has to become methoxyestrogen to leave the body. So that is very interesting because let's say like hormone replacement therapy, what estrogen would probably be the safest for the body would probably be a methoxyestrogen instead of just a regular estradiol, because if you don't make COMT, and some people don't make that super duper well. That's the link to why a woman would be estrogen dominant, why a man later would become estrogen dominant, but also in addition to having that epinephrine, norepinephrine problem, right? So why maybe anxiety could be ruling the roost a lot of times, because people in their genetic profiles will not methylate, we mentioned that, but then they also won't make COMT well. They won't make the car keys well, they won't make the cars very well. So you give these cofactors and people really have good response with especially mental emotional stuff. So it's all regulated, and you can see that methylation map wasn't linear. It was all circles and this and all over the place, right? So in biochemistry, you're going to probably start one thing at a time. Now, that said, you can't just give methylation willy-nilly, especially to somebody who's got a lot of sensitivities, because you can accidentally kick up glutamate, and that's what happens here. So this is actually something you can measure in your blood, homocysteine. So if I all of a sudden give methylation support and I get this cycle working well, and somebody here, this is called the CBS pathway, or it's actually a transsulfuration pathway. I have to look up what CBS stands for. So it's probably a cysteine pathway. So here we're pulling cysteine down into the liver very, very quickly. So pretend this is the liver. If I do this too quickly, who am I going to get? Well, you can get ammonia. You can also get glutamate. So that's probably what this should say. So here's cysteine, glycine and glutamate go together to make glutathione. Ammonia and glutamate are like very, very toxic for the system. And then here you're going to see the sulfite and the sulfate issues happening here too. Now, there's a little caveat here. You can give molybdenum to help this out. You can also give hydroxy B12 to help this out. You can give oxaloacetate to help this out. Ammonia here, you can give oxaloacetate to help that out. So there's ways you can kind of help this, but point being, when you just go methylation city, you can accidentally push a lot of stuff that's down in the liver that's not right yet for somebody. And there's ways in the genetics where you're going to see that. So you can see the genetics for the CBS pathway. You can also see, there's actually a GABA glutamate genetic kind of characteristic you can see there. That's not depicted very well in this methylation map. They left out the glutamate and the GABA piece to it, but an arrow from that glutathione is probably where there's that bridge. And so when somebody is super duper sensitive and maybe has some sensitivities to their nervous system, you would start with hydroxy B12 first, which is an unmethylated B vitamin, right? So hydroxy B12 is just something that really, really helps the liver out super duper well. I take it throughout the day. If I feel tired, I take a hydroxy B12 instead of caffeine. I'm trying to get off coffee. It's been a journey. It's not going well. It never is. Me and caffeine, man. Oh, and I've got a little chest congestion. I took it yesterday when I was just feeling super drained because, you know, I got the Texas cold that's going on now. It's not COVID, but it's something. Anyway, I've got this chest congestion. And so yesterday, you know, I was just feeling dragging and I took that B12 and boy, howdy, bing. I was like, I'm cured. Like, it's so amazing how you just take a little B12 and your body just responds super well. And you can take it as a capsule. You don't need a shot of it. That's something that I always get with people. They're like, oh, I go get B12 shots. Good for you, but you could just put it in a capsule and swallow it. You don't have to do it that way. I mean, I guess if you want to, but usually like the pernicious anemia folks or the folks that have like chronic gastritis or alcoholism will do chronic gastritis, that kind of thing. They might, need to bypass the whole digestive system and need like a shot of B12. But you can also nowadays just take a liposomal B12 too. You know, that just gets absorbed into your tissue, into your bloodstream right from your mouth. So yeah, anyway, B12 is great. So B12 here, in this case, if you had a touchy nervous system and you didn't know if I took methylation, if it would make things worse, we call that over-methylating. The term might be a little bit misleading because it's not necessarily taking too much methylation. It's that you have enzyme pathways set up and liver, I don't even call it imbalances, liver characteristics that are going to push to neurotoxic situations first before you go to balance out the adrenal situation. So it's like a whack-a-mole kind of idea. Like you calm down the adrenaline, but you sure, you know, got the ammonia and the glutamate up, you know, that can't feel good, or that feels terrible in a different way. So it might not, they definitely don't feel better, you know, that's the thing. So in that case, you're going to give hydroxy B12 first. The ammonia pathway, you're going to make sure that maybe your nitric oxide donor doesn't kind of go through, like, that's the whole arginine synthetase, like, discussion. And that's actually a good discussion we should have sometime. So, like, ammonia is going to get taken care of in a different way. Looking at the pathway here, you're going to just kind of make sure you don't have oxidative stress, queuing up that peroxynitrite problem, and that gives us a lot of oxidative damage. Ammonia is going to go, you want your nitrogens to be urea, you know, so you want it to be in the urea pathway. So ammonia and say glutamate, they're excitotoxins. Like they are oxidative stress. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to steal little electrons out of your river of electrons that should be flowing in the mitochondria. So now I've got a trickle of electrons flowing in that river instead of a really robust river. And now your poor little mitochondria are like, I can't make ATP super duper well. So who's going to kick in? The lactic acid cycle, right? So, and then people are going to be like, well, you have mitochondrial dysfunction. Well, it's not like you got mitochondria all over the place. It's not like your mitochondria, each and every one of them are sick. It's like they've got oxidative stress. Why? Because you've got reactive oxidative species hanging out in the tissue, robbing all of the electrons that probably should have been flowing in the right direction. I said that. I want to see if we double check to make sure I'm right. But I think that's probably the gist of it. There might be some little nuances in there that need to get corrected. But I think that mitochondrial fatigue, and that's also part of something, you know, the chronic fatigue folks and the fibromyalgia folks and anybody who's just like, I'm tired today, right? Because I've had a cold, you know, all of that is part of that, the mitochondria just trying to recover from the oxidative stress of having infection and having an immune reaction. In this case here, it would have been from somebody's own problems with pulling histamine down into the liver and having that done too fast. And then they get some oxidative stress out of it through ammonia and glutamate. And those are things that are going to bother everything. I mean, it's really glutamate to the brain. Think of MSG. That's my thing I'm always harping on. Does it have MSG? Then I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole. Monosodium glutamate, mind you, is a food additive. Oh, why? So we've got this like flavor enhancer kind of thing. It makes things taste yummy. Like MSG is like a food additive that excites the brain. Like I know I get a really massive headache out of it. Some people get a migraine out of it. Some people it triggers up their seizures, right? Other people are going to have massive anxiety out of it. And like, let's say you've got bipolar disorder, then well, now you've got too much excitatory neurons, and now you got to organize that, and that's hard, you know. Or let's say you've got like anxiety and then depression, right? So the mental health should be like the first ones, you know, lobbying against having MSG in the food at all. You know, especially people who have, like I've had little kids who've had seizure disorders and we're working nutrition up, right? And I am like, absolutely don't touch MSG with a 10-foot pole. And they better label it. Like I know there's some concern of it not getting labeled and having it be natural ingredients. Yeah, if you have that kind of touchiness to the situation, you definitely need help knowing that that's in there. So there's some concern with that thing. So MSG especially, those are oxidative stressors on the body. And yeah, that would pull into the mitochondria problem. Now remember, the funniest thing is that glutamate's not like the enemy to the body. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotoxin in its excess. But if it's imbalanced, you know, like here, why did we point to glutathione? Well, because cysteine, glycine, and glutamate make glutathione. Glutathione is your body's main antioxidant, right? So like if it's paired well with things and that pathway is well supported, it kind of needs its good friends. It needs to be paired with these things so that it runs these cycles well. There's one cycle here. I'll show you this. So this is the mitochondria. So here's that mitochondria that we're talking about. Then over here, we've got, you know, here's glutamate, right? So this is the malate aspartate shuttle. So think of magnesium malate. People take that quite a bit, especially the fibromyalgia folks. Why? Because we're trying to run the malate shuttle. And magnesium is just kind of hooked to that amino acid. So this is trying to run the malate shuttle to try to actually get the NAD and the NADH levels right. But here's glutamate that actually runs this, helps run this shuttle. I should break it down to kind of be a little bit more clear about what that means by run this shuttle. But it kind of sets up the, like, think of things like a gradient. It's going to set up the kind of like electron gradient. And so you're going to have the way a slide works. You have more potential energy up here. As you slide down, you go faster down to the bottom, right? So it's like if you have more potential energy on one side versus another, that creates a flow, right? And that's our river idea. So here, these are different. The malate aspartate shuttle is setting up so that we can help create that flow. So we've got our, ATP production happening here, you know. So here's the other like biochemical gradients here. Here's oxygen is what we call our terminal electron acceptor. So if this were kind of, I think the flow is trying to go this way. So think of, but it feels like oxygen's in the middle here. But I always like to think of oxygen as the end of this whole electron chain. And that kind of helps, you know, drive that into place. Yeah, so gradients in biochemistry through actual like concentration, or through the biochemistry through the actual electrochemical gradient, you know. So that's set up in this flow. So if you've got glutamate here, that's helping run that shuttle. So it's kind of interesting. I'm sure I'm way oversimplifying it, but glutamate, when it goes into play in the body, it's not, you know, public enemy, but it does play into these biochemistry natures that help cellular respiration, but also help the glutathione production. And probably other things. So, but when it's imbalanced, that's the key. And so what's triggering that imbalance is just, you know, I guess you'd call it like a fruit basket upset, you know, just that means that too much of one just spills over and causes this chaos as the body's trying to stabilize. So how do you help that situation? It gets back to that hydroxy B12. So we might even just do hydroxy B12 first, knowing the methylation's needed. But we need to do that first because we know we don't know what is set up in the liver. So you might just do something really easy. I think your safe bets a lot of times are hydroxy B12 and then probably P5P, which is it's just B6. And B6 doesn't get methylated, but P5P is an active B6. A lot of times those two things first before you even touch methylation. Now, if somebody's been, I've been taking this methylfolate, and then you're going to ask them key questions like, how are you doing, and how are you feeling, and are you sleeping okay, and are you anxious, and, you know, what do you notice with it? And I feel like nothing. And that's what I tell people too. I'm like, we're going to start methylation, and what I want is nothing, because I'll take nothing over panic attack any day. Because, yeah, I mean, you'll find that person, and that's, when I taught biochemistry, at AOMA, I would put that as a final exam question. Does everybody need methylfolate, or everybody needs methylfolate, true and false, or true or false, or something like that? And the answer, of course, is false. Not everyone can take methylfolate. Some people need folinate, and maybe we'll do a piece on that. And some people will do a lot of hydroxy B12 with a little bit methylfolate, and that stabilizes things better. So you may have to take care of the ammonia pathway, especially if somebody's talking to you about like mitochondrial dysfunction or like fatigue or the feeling like trigger point, like lactic acid. Think about when you've worked out too hard and you have like ouchy muscles, especially the next day. If that happens and you're like, I did not work out at all, you know, then that lactic acid cycle might be kicking in, you know, much more than your electron transport chain that should have been, you know, that should be working in the mitochondria. So if that's not playing out well, then you're going to hunt that down to figure out what antioxidant problem is there, what neurotoxin problem is there, what circulation problem is there, you know. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, right? As you can see, methylation gets really technical really fast. So I'm trying to break it down, and like, I'll work on this more. I'm working on an article that's just very basic. What is methylation? And I think that's useful because, of course, describing this in detail is really frustrating, and that's okay. The learning is important, especially with your own body. And I never want somebody to feel like they're not intelligent or that they're not keeping up with something. People get, and I know this because of course I felt this too in my own learning, like, am I dumb? You know what I mean? We all have these insecurities, and it's not about that at all. It's about that everybody learns differently and everybody gets it clicking differently. And when it's involving your body, and especially like estrogen dominance or an anxiety disorder or a mental disorder, or even in the beginning, we were talking about methylation in epigenetics, turning on and off genes, right? So if somebody's really trying to understand, why the heck should I take this methylfolate? I don't know if it's working or not. You know, it helps them understand why they should do that so they can stay committed to something. And of course that involves a lot of biochemistry, which is a hard subject to learn, you know. And so I want to break it down as easy as possible. So always ask questions or give analogies or say to me like, hey, Dr. Nelson, I don't think this makes sense or whatever. I really appreciate that so that I can break it down and try to get it into like a little bite-sized chunk. And that's hard sometimes, you know, and but I'm always pleased when I can kind of come up with an idea or an analogy or something like that, because that's what I'm after. I just want people to learn, and I love a dialogue, and I love questions and stuff. I think that's important. So it's a safe space to learn. That's what I'm getting at, is that in your at your doctor's office, you should feel very, very comfortable asking questions, and you shouldn't feel like scared to do so, you know. And I had great teachers. I think my favorite teacher was probably my organic chemistry teacher. He was wonderful. And, you know, I remember the end of the year review, we're reviewing organic chemistry, and I think somebody asked something that was probably from week 1, and it was kind of a basic question. And, you know, we were all a little bit like, oh, dude, that was from like week 1. You're in trouble, man. But he was just, oh, you learn by repetition. And then he spits it out, and let me review that pathway. He didn't judge at all. And I felt really happy to see that, because here I was probably judging, you know, and it was nice to have that reviewed too, really, you know. So it was really nice to just kind of, have the dialogue with it all, and just in a safe space to learn. And that's really important. Then you get, you know, learning going so that people can understand things. And then with learning, you need dialogue, right? So it's not just me spitting out information, because I'm probably wrong sometimes, you know, and that's okay to get corrected. And your teacher's wrong sometimes, you know. But if I have a lot of people who come to me and ask, well, or they don't ask, they say, I read this on the internet, right? The internet's a place of information. Like, our job is to be the investigator and be like, well, why does it say that? You know, why is it making that claim? Why did it say that? Well, it never said why. It just said, don't do this, or to take this, or it just said this sentence. And I'm like, you know, if I handed that in to my, you know, English teacher as a report, and they'd be like, there's no explanation why, and you clearly don't have a footnote. F, like, go ahead and rewrite that. You know, it wouldn't be an F. They would give you a rewrite, and they'd be like, let's talk about why this is not acceptable, right? So you want people to think. You want critical thinking to come into play. And that's, I think, our biggest problem with the internet, is that we need to hone in on our own critical thinking, and we need to make the world prove that, and to actually give us the explanation. And we need to be the judge if that explanation's good enough or not, you know? And if you don't get it, it might be because the explanation's crap, you know? So if you are like, I still don't understand, that's not on you. That was, you know, oh, well, let me try to explain it again, or explain it in a different way, probably because I'm missing some key logic steps, you know? So that's okay. I need to know that, and your teacher needs to know that, and that's a great dialogue, you know? Now, you do have to work hard at learning, though. There's times when you just weren't listening to me, were you? You know. Anyway, so we're going to do these little fun talks. We're going to continue with methylation next week. So we just kind of introduced the subject. I think it might be fun to just take key things apart. And so today we talked about, you know, especially the COMT. I'd like to bring a couple more articles published about COMT and methylfolate. You know, so that's really key in mental health, but also, like we mentioned today, about even estrogen dominance being a key piece with that, because estrogen, hydroxyestrogen, goes through the COMT pathway as well. And so that's kind of an interesting hidden place. So we'll expand upon this. This might be like a 10-part thing or whatever. Methylation class is what we'll call it. And then I'm going to try to work on an article and get those posted too. So yeah, but ask questions for sure. And if there's something else you want to talk about, definitely let us know, because I like talking about all subjects. And this is just a fun thing.